All right, well, we've hit the top of the hour here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you again, everybody, for joining us today. Some quick housekeeping before we dive into the presentation. If you do have questions as we go through, please use the question and answer window to send those questions to us. Cassie will be monitoring the chat, but sometimes if multiple things come in at once, we might miss a question or something like that. So please do make use of that question and answer pane to send us questions through the presentation. Joining me is Dr. Trent Ford, the Illinois climatologist. So thank you for joining us today. Um, so a little bit about what we're going to get into today. I'm going to do just a brief introduction to our program. Um, and then after Dr. Ford's presentation, I'll talk about how to prepare for harsh weather and some climate resilience tools that are available to help utilities with that preparation. So a little bit about who we are here at CDAC. We are an applied research program at the University of Illinois, housed at Urbana-Champaign's campus. We assist communities with achieving energy efficiency, reducing costs for energy consumption, and becoming more sustainable overall. Um, our goal in our office is to help reduce the energy footprint of Illinois and beyond. So to achieve that goal, we provide education on how to become more energy efficient. We conduct research into more efficient technologies and best practices. Um, and we help communities advocate for their sustainable futures through energy assessment reports, through green business programs, and multiple other opportunities through our office. This program in specific is a partnership with the Illinois EPA Office of Energy and the Illinois Sustainable Technology Center um, to help us provide these energy assessments to you at no cost. As long as you are a publicly owned wastewater or water facility, it can be a no-cost energy assessment for you. We do provide a comprehensive report where we try to go through kind of a high level of what the cost for some of these upgrades will be to help you kind of prioritize projects and where to focus, estimated payback periods for those projects, and any applicable incentives and funding opportunities. And I know that's kind of the big ticket that a lot of people are looking for is where can we get some additional funds? Um, then also we provide continuing education opportunities like today to help operators maintain CEUs and learn about more efficient technologies and best practices in the field. Just sharing kind of what we learn as we go around to different sites and do assessments and learn about best practices. So why might you complete a wastewater treatment plant assessment? For older existing plants or a plant that's never had an assessment before, we can come in, help you identify opportunities, improve on existing practices, um, and technology and best practices are always improving. Something else that we like to stress is that we can offer a way for operators to voice their needs, um, and then attach numbers to that to help drive home the need for plans and the benefits that those will bring to their operations. Um, what about for new or recently upgraded plants? Again, there's always, with budget restrictions, things get left on the table, things get budgeted out of the project. And maybe a lot of times those are focused on first costs and trimming down the initial design costs for a facility, but sometimes that leaves a lot of future ongoing costs on the table. Um, and so we can help identify where those kind of trade-offs may have happened or where it may be beneficial to take that longer road look at the design. We can help you plan for future opportunities for future upgrades that maybe weren't allowed in the current budget. And again, there's always new technologies and processes in development that we try to keep an ear to the ground for those things so we can kind of raise awareness of new opportunities that are coming out to the market. So how to apply for assessment? Simply go to our website, www.smartenergy.illinois.edu/water. There's an initial application form there that just says, verifies you're in Illinois and publicly owned, that you're going to allow us to come out to your site and document conditions and equipment. You do need to share some information with us. I'll get into that here in a second. And then there is a note in there that the report is shared back to the Illinois EPA Energy Office. We do stress this is not it's a non-regulatory report. It's just to help them track the effectiveness of our program because we've had some questions come up about that in the past. But again, pretty quick and easy first form. Once we have that information, that form is turned in, you've indicated interest to us, we'll set up a short call with you to do an additional, more detailed form to get some information about your plant, help us prepare for the site visit. The next thing that we're going to request is if we can work with you directly or if someone else at your municipality handles your utility bills. We do need to gain access to those to do your initial benchmarking and gather your energy information so that we can let you know kind of where you stand, and it helps us better estimate what your potential impacts from energy conservation measures would be. If you're in Ameren or ComEd territory, that's pretty simple. We just need an account number, and we can pull the rest of the data that we need. If you do happen to be on a co-op or one of the non-Ameren gas utilities, they don't have a ready access program for us to pull that data from. So we do ask that we work with someone at the municipality or at the plant to get um, your utility documentation. We try to gather 2 years. That way, if there's any kind of anomaly in one year, we can kind of try to blend it out and get the typical operation for your facility. Um, we do try to make this as seamless and painless for you as possible. So anything that we can pull ourselves, like discharge monitoring reports for wastewater facilities, um, the utility bills from Ameren and ComEd. We'll pull all that information ourselves if we can. We'll only rely on you if we absolutely have to gather that information, um, acknowledging that everyone's time is precious and you're all doing a lot of work out there in your communities. As far as the site visit itself, once we've got all your utility data and our benchmarking is ready, we'll schedule the site visit date with you. Typically, we're going to be on site between 1 and 2 hours, depending on the size and complexity of your treatment facility. Some very, very large ones, we've been out there almost 3 hours on site. Usually, there's going to be two of us on site taking pictures and documenting process conditions, motor nameplates, set points, operating conditions, things like that, so that it helps us build out ideas for the energy efficiency measures and helps us put limits on what the potential savings can be. So we're going to be taking a lot of pictures when we're out on site. We're going to work with you to document your experiences, any maintenance issues, desired upgrades, things that can impact our treatment report that you want to specifically see in the report, so that we can help tune that to what your facility needs and what your staff will benefit the most from, as well as uncovering some of those opportunities you may not have thought about. So that's how our program works. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Ford. He's going to talk a little bit about kind of what we can expect in weather changes uh, going forward. So Dr. Ford, it's all you. Let me give you control of the slides here.
All right. Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. And yeah, thanks everybody for just giving me some of your time today. I want to talk about, changing rainfall patterns and impacts, especially related to wastewater across the state of Illinois. Like Sean mentioned, my name is Trent Ford. I'm the state climatologist for Illinois. I'm based here at the State Water Survey in Champaign. So, the big impact that I think we've seen, I mean, the kind of 10,000-foot view of our changing weather patterns across the state of Illinois is we've gotten wetter. We've also gotten warmer over the last 125 years or so. But I think that the biggest change as far as precipitation is concerned is just the intensity of that rainfall. So heavier rainfall and the flooding issues that it causes. So here showing the radar image from a storm in July over the St. Louis Metro East area that was responsible for, producing anywhere between 4 and 8 inches of rain in a relatively short period of time. That really impacted several communities, including Nashville, Illinois, which is where the reservoir and the dam that I'm showing here on the right hand side. And so this is something that we've been seeing, that the same kind of storms that would produce more moderate rainfall totals 40, 50, 60 years ago are now producing heavier totals, and there are overwhelming stormwater drainage systems in developed areas, as well as just water drainage systems in rural areas, and causing problems with inundation kind of across municipalities. Just to put some numbers on this, this table is sort of an anthology of design rainfall. Now, I'm showing just the example from Northwest Illinois, but the same pattern exists everywhere, no matter where you're at, central, southern, northern Illinois. But basically, what this shows is the design rainfall. So we're estimating a 100-year storm, so a 1% chance of it happening any given year for a 24-hour period of time. And what you can see here, we go all the way back to the 1960s with these estimates in technical paper 40, where that number was put at about 6.4 inches. So if you're in, let's say, Boone County or McHenry County, you had a 1% chance of getting about 6.5 inches in a single day, any given year. And so you could design stormwater drainage systems and protection for wastewater systems, treatment systems accordingly. We re-estimated those numbers back in 1989, and that number jumped up to 7.3 inches, meaning that it's just that much more likely to get that much more rain. And then we re-estimated those numbers in 2020 with newer data, and it got up to 8.25 inches. And this is the most recent number here, the one in 2020, which is almost 2 inches higher. So if you were to have in the 1960s or 70s build stormwater drainage infrastructure or again protection for wastewater treatment to that 100-year storm, now that 100-year storm estimate is antiquated. We're actually two inches over that, meaning you're likely seeing more of these impactful storms more frequently. When we just completed the most recent study, where we're not only looking at historical numbers for these design storms, but projecting them into the future. Because the thing that we were hearing from those in the water sector was that they got tired of looking at past data to say, like, here's what it was in 1960, here's what it was in 1990, here's what it was in 2020. They're saying we're building infrastructure that's got a 50 to 100-year lifetime. We want to know what it's going to be like in 2050, and so that's what we're looking at here with this new Bulletin 76. And I have the link here, but at the my last slide, which I shared with Sean, so it should be available for everybody, has a link to that new study, so you can look at more specifically in your part of the state what those numbers look like. But again, what this is suggesting is that by 2050, that 100-year storm in Northwest Illinois is going to be almost 2.5 inches higher than it was back in the 1960s. So what this is indicating is that increase in the intensity of rainfall, and because that rain is falling on landscapes that were built or infrastructure that was built for past climates, causing more of those inundation and flooding problems. To make it more kind of relevant for flooding, I'm borrowing a map here from the Champ Group at the Water Survey that does most of the flood mapping for the state of Illinois. And this is for the Nippersink Creek in McHenry County, just as an example. And basically, what they're doing is flood modeling, plugging these different design storm numbers into their flood model to show how much more inundation there would be. So, based off of the old numbers from the 1960s and the 1980s relative to the newer numbers more recently, we see these areas marked in gray are areas of modeled inundation with flooding next to the Nippersink Creek that based off of the old numbers would not have been inundated. So just by plugging in those new numbers that are representing that change in that rainfall intensity, we're seeing an expansion of the risk areas that are for flooding. And when we think about critical infrastructure, healthcare, utilities, wastewater treatment in particular, seeing this expanded risk really mandates further planning and in some cases mitigation of some of these flood impacts. And so again, have the link here for Illinois flood maps, and this is specifically for the Upper Fox, but there's I have the link at the end of the presentation here that shows the for the whole state, these sort of flood maps that we're working on. So this is kind of the big picture here. The climate trend is heavier rainfall, and that heavier rainfall, even if it's the same total, because it's falling more intensely, creates more stormwater, more runoff. And what that means is infrastructure impacts from urban and developed flooding, overwhelmed drainage, building road inundation, and those critical services at a higher risk of flood inundation, including wastewater treatment. Of course, solutions, resilient infrastructure, hazard and flood planning to make sure that the most recent information as far as rainfall rates and flood maps are included in those hazard mitigation plans. And then, of course, looking at things like insurance options and things like that as municipalities can for adequate protection. And I just wanted to again put a plug here of the Champ Group and their urban flood mapping and prediction that's going on at the water survey. Probably have seen the people who are checking in, all the attendees from different parts of the state. Many of you have probably worked with the Champ Group, or folks in your counties have, for updated hazard mitigation and flood mapping. So the link is here, and again, I'll include it in there. This is a good group to connect with if you are concerned or going through that hazard mitigation process, especially for flooding. One thing that they're trying to really push for the state is both two-dimensional flood modeling, which means you can update flood maps a lot more quickly, as well as building scale damage risk assessments. And this is something to say that if we have a residential area with the new storm numbers are let's say it's increased risk of flooding, can quantify the potential economic damage, which can go a long way to getting either federal or state mitigation money through grants for that damage. So again, these are all advancements in both modeling and assessment that are trying to keep up with our changing climate. So what I've talked about so far is change in the form of non-stationarity. So we think about, a lot of times we think about the weather and climate as stationary, right? It varies on a seasonal time scale or day to day, but it's sort of stationary. But in reality, what climate change is doing is making that non-stationary. And oftentimes we think about that as a trend. So non-stationary is a trend. We're getting warmer, we're getting wetter, rainfall is getting heavier. And that's all true, and the trend is really important, but I also want to point out that there's different forms of non-stationarity beyond just a simple increasing or decreasing trend. And one of the big ones is a shift in the variability, and that long-term change in the variance I would argue, especially for managing water, is just as important as that long-term trend. So yes, Illinois is getting wetter, but what we're dealing with is more variability on shorter time scales of heavy rain followed by longer periods of dryness that can lead to some moderate to severe drought followed by heavy rain. So dealing with those two extremes more frequently, despite the fact that we're wetter overall, leads to a need for maybe a shifted or different management paradigm and thinking about kind of more holistically how we're managing these hazards. So this is just, and we're probably all familiar with this, like surface hydrology 101 here, that, when we get precipitation, it either goes into the ground, it's captured by the surface, or it runs off. And what we're seeing is because of that heavier precipitation, we're getting more runoff, which is kind of the basis of what I talked about so far. And increased peak stream flow, nutrient runoff, soil erosion, sedimentation. These are all water quality issues that do affect the treatment that it's needed for stormwater and for sewage as well. And just to say that if we're looking at, for example, here the Kaskaskia River Basin, that when we think about heavier rainfall over the entirety of the Kaskaskia, all the way from up here in Champaign down to where it empties in the Mississippi in Randolph County. We're thinking about a combination of agricultural land, developed municipalities, including much of the Metro East. And what that means is that there's different entities, different priorities, different groups that all not only are being affected by increased heavy rainfall and flooding in this watershed, but also have a contribution to both the problems and the solutions that those things come along with. And so bringing together these different voices is extremely important when thinking about managing and planning. So if you're just focusing on wastewater treatment, for example, that of course is what a lot of folks here are kind of in their day-to-day purveyance, but bringing together those groups along with municipal managers, farmers, and ag leaders is extremely important, because a lot of these things are intertwined when it comes to things like changing rainfall patterns. And just as an example, something that we've been dealing with is over the last, 40, 50 years is increasing nutrient loss from agricultural fields that come from that heavy rainfall. And just showing the example from one of the latest nutrient loss reduction strategies biannual reports across the state, showing that, we're seeing that increase, small, but increase nonetheless, in nitrate loads in many of our streams and rivers across the state, despite all of these actions being taken. And part of that, not all of it, but part of it is due to these increasing rainfall amounts. So a water quality problem, a treatment problem, that is affecting many watersheds across the state. Now I've so far and for most of this presentation I've talked about excess water, and that's mainly because the trend is clear. The connection with our changing climate is clear, right? We're getting heavier rainfall; it's increasing. But I did want to mention drought for just a second here, and drought is extremely complicated. And the connection with climate change in Illinois is also really complicated, nonlinear. So there's different things going on at the same time. So I kind of break it down into different things, different aspects of drought that we have here, and sort of our confidence of how well we think these things are changing. So, for example, at the very top one, we're more confident there's more evaporation. So water is leaving the ground in larger doses, especially in the summertime. So what that means is if we're not getting replenishing rains, we can see that evaporation cause drought problems a lot more quickly, which is also what I have up here of is more frequent flash droughts, these rapid onset drought events that can come on rather quickly. So we think about drought that's something that comes on over 3 to 4 months. Flash droughts more like 6 to 8 weeks. We're going from, yeah, things are okay to, man, we're actually seeing some drought impacts. So that's something that more evaporation can do to us. Also confident, somewhat confident in things like more nutrient sedimentation issues. This is something that a lot of reservoirs, surface water reservoirs across the state are dealing with is sedimentation coming from that heavy rainfall. And what that means is it's just lower capacity for potable drinking water, which is an issue. And then we have all of these other things that are more uncertain. So for example, I go to the very uncertain category where the impact on groundwater recharge is really uncertain because groundwater is something that's very challenging to model. And we have emerging threats like PFAS and things like that that can cause issues with water quality, as well as annual to decadal climate variability. So on top of that climate change signal, we're also having the fact that there's some decades and some years that are going to be wetter or drier or warmer or colder than others, and how that all lays out and impacts folks on the ground is a bit more unclear. So when it comes to heavy rainfall and climate change, it's pretty consistent. Heavier rainfall, more rain overall. When it comes to drought, we could have faster, more frequent, kind of shorter term, but kind of rapid onset drought. But overall, not necessarily more frequent, long term drought that affects things like water resources as much. Last thing here I want to mention is that we are currently working on an exciting project here at the U of I to make all of this climate data that kind of is the background of my presentation more accessible for folks on the ground. So obviously this is the state of Minnesota, but this is just showing an example of what we're shooting for here in Illinois. And that is a tool that folks can get online either on their laptop or tablet or phone, visualize and assess projected future changes in climate and weather extremes. You can parse it by county, by city, by watershed. If there's other units that are relevant, I'd love to hear from folks about, I want to know information for this particular unit. And also questions to be considering for this kind of thing is what kind of information is accessible for long-term or is actionable for long-term planning? What kind of hazards are you concerned about? Obviously, heavy rain, extreme heat will be part of this, but what other hazards are there and what timelines matter? So this is something that's in development now, has a maybe 1 year timeline. So hopefully by this time next year, we'll have a beta tool that's actually functioning online that folks can play with. But certainly between now and then, love to hear feedback about this is when we're thinking about long-term changes in our climate, what are we missing? What is the information that we could use that could help with long-term planning? And how can we get that information that can be built directly in here? So definitely want to hear from you. And my contact information is at the bottom there. So this is the last slide I got, and just summary of everything that I mentioned, and some resource links there for both the future looking future design storms, the Bulletin 76, the Champ group here at the U of I, and then if you want to mess around and see what is possible in Illinois, the University of Minnesota Future Climate Portal. So with that, Sean, I apologize. I think I went over a little bit, but I'm really thanks again for letting me talk. I'm happy to answer any questions that folks may have.
I think you did well. We did have one question in regarding wetlands and whether they have an advantage or a disadvantage using a constructed wetland for wastewater treatment with increasing flooding. And I know Bloomington Normal is in the chat. They have a constructed wetland they've talked about before. Maybe they can drop a note in the chat. But my understanding for constructed wetlands is they are designed for a specific flow rate. And so um, if you increase the throughput through the plant, you can potentially wash out um, that constructed wetland and not get the nutrient removal benefits out of it. Um, So I don't think that there is necessarily an advantage for them, specifically in treatment process. Um, Managing water, really, that's got to come upstream from the plant with green infrastructure and I&I abatement projects, things like that. Um, what I'd like to get into now, just some of the issues specific to wastewater facilities. Oop, take control back of the presentation. Share my screen again. Okay. But issues specific to wastewater facilities due to weather hazards, some of the solutions that we've seen implemented across other facilities, focusing kind of mainly on some of the things in Illinois has seen, and we'll touch on some other kind of innovative ones we've seen around the country. And then we'll also touch on the Creating Resilient Water Utilities program with EPA and PNNL's Technical Resilience Navigator. These are kind of online-based programs that can help you walk through like a checklist of issues and potential solutions and kind of prioritize those projects and help you with the planning process for how to address harsher weather conditions. So you know, as Dr. Ford's kind of gone over already, weather patterns are shifting. We're going to see more frequent occurrences of extreme weather, both intense rainfalls and short, brief, but intense drought as potential. Wind is also going to be a bigger thing with increasing temperatures. You get higher winds, more risk of tornadoes, things like that. Higher precipitation in the wintertime with warmer temperatures leads to more ice instead of snow, so you can have power outages and things related to that. So key issues for wastewater plants, specifically inflow and infiltration. A lot of plants are built near streams and riverways that can flood. So how do you address flooding risks? Utility disruptions and loss of power. And then, do you have emergency planning and responses in place to address each of these issues? And that's where we'll get into those available resources. But some of those impacts, again, heavy rains, you're going to see more inflow and infiltration and flooding at wastewater treatment facilities. You can see in the picture here, I was on an assessment. This was a couple of days after a flood event at this wastewater treatment facility that completely flooded and overwhelmed this influent screening center. So you can see all the debris and stuff still sitting on top of things in there. Um, Drought, though, if water can leak into your sewer mains, if the soil gets dry enough, it can leak back out. We have been in some communities where just due to higher efficiency water fixtures and the reduction of flow rates from those have had settlement issues that cause backups and blockages in their sewer mains. Similar things can happen with drier ground and exfiltration from the sewer mains, um, where you're going to have increased maintenance on just clearing out clogs and backups from the system, as well as contamination leaking into the soil that might lead to other issues. Um, Wind issues, you have power loss due to down power lines or damage specifically at your facility. If it's a tornado or a downburst event that has really high winds, you could damage to roof structures. Debris could be thrown into plant facilities and damage things like that. And then with extreme temperatures, there's increased risk of brownouts and power interruptions, freeze damage to pipes and things at facilities that might traditionally not have, um, just as those extremes occur more frequently. So some example solutions for addressing inflow and infiltration. Um, we've had MWRD talking before about their tunnel and reservoir plan to capture that stormwater, redirect it into holding basins, and then introduce it at a slower rate to their treatment facilities so that they're not overwhelmed by the amount of water coming in that could disrupt treatment processes. Green infrastructure and stormwater reduction practices. City Peoria has some pretty good images and resources on their abatement programs to help them reduce I&I and combined sewer overflows. Um, Operation and maintenance. We were going to talk a little bit about Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District. They have an ongoing budget where they're continually working on uh, abating leakage and I&I into their system through just they've got a regular line item budget and plan out projects for lining sewer mains, repairing manhole covers and things like that to keep stormwater out and sewer water in those pipes. So a little bit more detail on the TARP program from MWRD, known as that Deep Tunnel Project. You can see here some pictures of the McCook Reservoir and the development of the tunnels that connect those to the sewer system. Um, Total capacity of up to 11 billion gallons of combined sewage and stormwater. And again, is to capture and hold that water in a location until it can be slowly introduced to the plants at a rate that they can accept without interrupting the treatment process. City of Peoria's green infrastructure program. Um, for them, something like the TARP project wasn't cost effective. So what they're doing instead is focusing on green infrastructure, letting that stormwater filter into the soils naturally. So impermeable pavement, like the brick lined streets here you're seeing on, or sorry, permeable pavements. Um, Green infrastructure like bioswales and rain gardens and plantings in the community that kind of break up that impermeable concrete surface. um, Green roof opportunities for buildings. So, all the runoff just from building surfaces like roofs uh, can be kind of managed and slowed down, keeping some of that rainwater out of the sewer systems and out of the storm collection systems. So there's a lot of cost savings benefits to this. Some of these have energy benefits for the buildings they're installed on. Green roofs can help reduce cooling loads because of that evaporative effect off the roof, keeps the roof cooler. Um, Decreases pollution, as stormwater runs directly off of streets and things. Um, a lot of wastewater plants have all kinds of stories of fun things that have washed into their bar screens or initial grit removal processes. We've seen bikes and tires and traditional smaller things like plastic bags and stuff like that. That green infrastructure can kind of help capture those things in place and then get cleaned up locally. Um, Instead of that getting flushed out through the storm sewers into our waterways. And these things can also help improve air quality. They're carbon sinks. They can help filter some of airborne pollutants out of the air. Um, so this is another opportunity to help reduce the impact of increased rainfalls before it reaches your treatment plant. Um, Implementing green infrastructure up front is for Peoria, about two-thirds the cost of installing new pipes or tunnels, drilling new systems. So that's why they went with that option for them. For Urbana-Champaign Sanitary District, again, just ongoing operation and maintenance. So they've got weekly and monthly inspections. They're running cameras to the sewer mains, identifying issues, routes that are broken in and blocking the lines, places where there's leaks and openings in the sewer mains, cleaning those things out, um, implementing cured in place pipelinings to seal those holes and maintain the integrity of the collection system. And that should say point repairs um, of issues in the collection system. For facility planning, this is just an example, probably based on older flood maps here from the city of Metropolis. But when we went out to do the site visit, Metropolis was actually flooded at the time. Um, but the wastewater treatment plant was just out of the floodplain. So it was high and dry, didn't have any issues with, the flood affecting the operations at the plant itself. But as you can see here on the map on the right-hand side of the screen, they're in an area where should flooding increase in over time, they might now be in the floodplain. So we've been to a number of communities that are considering new wastewater treatment facilities and locating those. One of the things you might want to consider is where you're locating that plant. Is it within the updated floodplain um, where you might want to pick a different location for it? Power outages, things like that. A lot of plants have been looking to solar projects to help offset some of their energy consumption and lower their costs. Um, this is an example from Kincaid. We've had them talk about it a number of times. Um, but that array is sized to bring the plant close to net zero electric consumption um, as an average throughout the year. Um, they've installed it as a power purchase agreement to offset the maintenance of that solar array system to a third party. So essentially, they're just paying a negotiated lower rate for this the electric production off of this system. It is grid tied for net metering, but it is not an islanded system. So it doesn't have like a battery bank backup power system that the solar is feeding into. If the power grid goes down, to prevent safety issues for linemen working on the site and backfeeding into lines, the solar grid shuts down too. So while this is kind of a partial step towards power outage resiliency, it's not a full step because when the grid goes down, so does the array, and the plant still needs backup generators to run processes. So that's something that we're seeing as a consideration at wastewater plants is if they are going solar, are they also going to look into islanding that system and providing a battery system where it can provide backup power supply to the plant? Downers Grove, working towards net zero energy production. They've actually achieved it a couple of years and then had some maintenance issues with one of their combined heat and power systems. So they're not quite there, but they're working their way back towards it again. But they're just burning on-site biogas in a combined heat and power system. So again, a little bit of independence from the grid. If they can work out battery storage systems or islanding from the grid, um, they have the potential here to run completely off grid um, with the biogas that they're generating on site. So where we have actually seen microgrid kind of implementation at sites, this is the Laguna Wastewater Treatment Plant in Santa Rosa, California. Over their parking lot, they've got a solar shade. So it's about 2 MWh, or sorry, 2 megawatts of solar installed. And they also paired that with a 480 kilowatt hour battery storage system. Um, the carport array is 126 kilowatts. Um, they've got an existing 1.1 megawatt CHP system, so that's where that 2 megawatts combined from those systems. They've also got some solar on the roof of the building. Um, but the most important thing here is they have islanded the system. So if the grid goes down, they've got a switch gear that disconnects them from the grid, so they can still power the plant from these renewable systems and maintain their operations even if the grid goes down. Um, Pairing this with battery storage, things like that, um, gives them the ability, if the outage happens at night, they've still got the ability to run the plant for, I believe, with the 480 kilowatt battery, it was somewhere around 2 hours of backup power runtime for their facility. McKinleyville, California was another one. They set up a microgrid, another 580 kilowatt solar system with a 500 kilowatt battery energy storage system that is designed and integrated to power the entire plant once it's islanded from the grid. So you can kind of see diagrammatically on the left or right side of the screen there, there's that switch gear cutoff for the connection to the grid. Um, but with the battery system they've got installed, um, it's 1,340 kilowatt hours in a single discharge from that battery, which gives them about 2 hours of backup. And then they also have supplemental diesel generators for longer outages. But this gives them a way to be clean for as long as possible with their backup power systems before they have to go to more traditional systems that do have associated emissions and things like that. So I'm going to kind of skim through some of the tools that are available to help plants with planning for how to address these hazards in the future. The first one we look at is the Pacific Northwest Laboratories Technical Resilience Navigator. So this is just an online database. Um, it's kind of set up like an interview question format. So you'll go through and you answer some questions about your facility, rank some things in it. Um, but this lets you identify what some of the critical functions are at your facility as far as sourcing of chemicals and material purchases, maintenance cycles for equipment, what utilities are connected to your plant, and identify how long each of those critical functions can be down before you have an unacceptable interruption to your facility services. So if you can't ship in um, chlorine for your disinfection process, how much storage do you have on site that you can run your plant for so many days um, before an interruption in service uh, is detrimental to your treatment process? Um, It also helps you identify if you have redundancies existing at your plant to help mitigate interruptions to critical services. So if you've got multiple utility connections to your plant, if one part of the grid goes down, maybe the other part can still power your plant, or if you've got backup power systems. It also documents water and energy resource requirements to help size resilient solutions. So if you're going to install battery backup or storage tanks for storm overflows or renewable systems, things like that, it can help you plan that sizing. But as you're going through the form, um, on-site experience is best for selecting some of these hazards. What it's doing is they're having you rank how likely um, an interruption is to your process. So hazards can be grouped if the source of the hazard has an indistinguishable effect on the facility from another. So if the power goes out versus from an animal or a car taking down a power line versus the wind taking down the power line, those all fall under grid power interruptions. So you can kind of group things together that way. Um, or if there are distinguishable, separate characterized impacts to your plant, you can separate them into what's called dual impact hazards, where they have both offsite and on-site impacts to equipment and services. So a good example is a tornado that can disrupt power for the plant and also damage facilities at the plant site. Um, so you can then group those hazards and assess them by their potential frequency. So as you're grouping hazards such as power outages, you can group all the potential frequencies of that into one category and have an overall frequency of power outage rating. Um, and that's kind of how the system is working to group things together and then um, provide a likelihood that an outage is going to happen. Once you've identified those hazards and the frequency and severity, those are fed into the next step where you're looking at a vulnerability analysis. So it's another series of questions to evaluate if you have redundant systems if power goes out, do you have a backup power system? How long will that backup power system be able to maintain plant operations before there's another issue? Um, what you're kind of seeing in the line graphs below is um, an example looking at backup power. If um, backup power starts before a tolerable outage duration, if all the power goes off within 5 minutes, the power comes back on, your overall treatment process isn't going to be interrupted by that. Um, to the end of the outage, as long as your system covers that entire period, then there's no issue. Same thing on the back end. If the backup system runs out of fuel for some reason, but your system's only down for a short amount of time, and then the power comes back up, that also doesn't create an issue. Where you do run into a problem is if you have a system that runs out of fuel before or doesn't start up in time to present an interruption to the process. Now you've got a situation where you're not meeting treatment needs, and that system needs to have some redesign or um, additional systems added to it to improve redundancy and cover that risk. So that's what the vulnerability analysis is trying to identify. And then after it's gone through those analyses, it assigns a consequence and criticality weighting factor to those hazards. So it's looking at the frequency of the hazard potentially happening and using that kind of as a weighting factor. And then looking at the vulnerability, how vulnerable are you to an interruption that's going to critically impact your treatment process, um, and grouping those into a way to prioritize which projects to address first. So this was originally an example from an office. I just relabeled it to make it look like a wastewater treatment plant. Um, so um, bear that in mind when looking at the example here. But um, just as an example, sludge drying could probably be pretty susceptible to a power outage. And if you can't dry the sludge and the system starts backing up, maybe that's something that has more importance than, the other parts of the process, like powering your office equipment. If that goes down, does it really impact the rest of the treatment plant processes? Um, so this is a way to organize and prioritize where do you need to focus on making updates and planning in the future um, to make sure that if there is an interruption to power or the supply of materials, flooding has blocked the inroads to your plant. So chlorine can't be delivered or other treatment chemicals can't be delivered. You know, what do you need to do to abate those things and then prioritize those based on how likely the impact is to happen to your facility. So that's one example of a program. The EPA has a resilient strategies guide. This is more kind of a checklist item. You work through this program online, set up some of your initial priorities, just kind of through a checklist survey that has multiple options that might apply to your treatment facility. As you select your priorities, it feeds into the next list where you're looking at your assets. So you have priorities for things to look at, then you see which assets are impacted and connected to those priorities, and you select from a list of those what applies to your facility. Um, that links into connecting those assets to what systems are applied at the plant, like your SCADA system. Is it buildings? Is it HVAC systems? Is it the collection system upstream of your plant? Um, then it gets into a strategies checklist. How are you going to uh, address those priorities for those assets? And there's kind of a general ranking of pricing for those. So you can filter down these strategies and solutions by kind of a typical price range, um, or you can filter it based on specific categories to help you work through a rather long list of potential correction strategies. You can see on the example screen here, even after filtering through for the plant's priorities and which assets those connect to, there are still 130 priority potential things um, to address in this checklist. To help you get through that, they have ways to break those down into smaller categories so you can look at them in smaller groups and you're not so overwhelmed by the selection process. Once you've selected strategies, then they also connect you to what funding sources are available to assist with implementing those strategies. And again, you can group those up by whether those are capital projects, whether they're planning and development projects. You can look for whether it's a local funding source versus a federal funding source or a state funding source. So again, helps you kind of work your way through multiple different categories of funding sources so that you're not overwhelmed by the number of options. Um, an interesting thing that can be done with this resilient guide is it can feed data into another program called the Create tool, um, which is the Climate Resilience Evaluation Awareness and Resilience tool developed by the EPA. So this is a tool that takes kind of the weather analysis that Dr. Ford was talking about and overlays that with the kind of initial risk analysis of how frequent these potential interruptions might be to project into the future what the change in your risk will be based on climate change issues. Um, Looking at who's used this program on their case studies, the couple of local ones are focused on potable water plants and drought resilience. So looking for alternative water sources. But a little bit farther out, uh, in Faribault, Minnesota, there was a flood threats assessment, and most of the assessments focus on flood risks and concerns for wastewater treatment facilities. So kind of getting into those examples, looking at Traverse City, Michigan was one of the ones that stood out. They had three 50-year floods and a 200-year flood between 2020 and 2021 that just overwhelmed their collection systems. So they had a lot of sewer overflows going into the lake. They also had a lot of erosion of some of their riverfront sewer mains that exposed those to potential catastrophic failure, let alone infiltration issues. Um, so they use the Create tool to kind of work their way through prioritizing measures and looking at what they could do to abate those risks and settled on two measures that they investigated on top of all their existing measures that they have at the plant, which included increasing wet well storage to reduce backups in the sewer system and related damage to facilities and client buildings, and then upsizing and relocating those riverfront sewer mains that were being exposed due to erosion. Um, Using that create tool that helped connect them to state revolving loan funds to focus on those couple of projects, get them implemented as early as possible. Um, and then they started prioritizing some of their other plans that they already had in place and um, such as rehabilitation projects, sewer lining projects, and things like that. But they were really focused on those two issues because they had immediate and wider ranging impacts than just the wastewater treatment plant itself. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. Um, Cassie, I don't know if you've seen anything coming through the chat as far as questions.
No, no questions, just a comment.
Okay.
It says, unfortunately, wastewater treatment plants are energy hogs and may need to plan for expansion, so available land might not be available for solar installations. But if expansion is planned for 20 to 30 years, that area could be temporarily used and millions of dollars could be saved, and carbon footprints can generally be reduced in the meantime while we're in the meantime reducing weather extremes. That's a great question.
Hmm.
That's a great comment. Thanks for adding that, Dave.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good comment, and it's a factor into, if your plant is determined that it's going to need to expand either on analysis or engineering design, you're already planning for an expansion that's going to eat up territory. Maybe this helps you figure out, maybe you're doing participating in a community solar plan or a remote solar PPA instead of one that's directly at the facility. So there are options and ways to work around that. Um, but yes, that is an excellent point. Um, let's see. I don't see any other questions. Dr. Ford, I did want um, to bring up a question for you with the intensity of rainfall. I know kind of the groundwater infiltration and things is a little bit hard to manage, but with more intense rain, my understanding is that that leads to more runoff and less kind of percolation into the soil. And so then when it does dry out again, droughts can be more intense sooner after a rain event. Is that a correct understanding?
Yeah, that's something we're trying to get a better handle on, how the change in rainfall intensity is affecting infiltration. So from like an ag standpoint, the effect on root zone soil moisture is important. But yeah, like you mentioned, groundwater for those sort of shallow groundwater reserves can be also affected by how well or not well that water can infiltrate. So I don't have great exact numbers, but it's something that we're actively working on now to get a better idea of how infiltration could be affected by that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a good
Okay,
question.
thank you. And it does kind of tie back into groundwater sourced water treatment plants that we'll touch on in next week or next month's webinar. We'll be talking about this similar project for potable water plants. But as we're drawing down groundwater levels, you start getting subsidence of soils that can lead to damage and issues with collection systems where shifting soils and things can actually open up pipes and cause greater issues. So something to be aware of as well. But not seeing any further questions come into the chat here. I want to thank everyone for attending today. I hope you found the session informative. Thank you, Dr. Ford, for presenting with us. Um, I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you at the next webinar.